Jeremy Wayne Tate is founder and CEO of the Classic Learning Test and a national leader in the revival of classical education. He has been featured on Fox News, MSNBC, The Wall Street Journal, The Washington Post, Inside Higher Ed, and The New York Times. Prior to founding CLT, Jeremy served as Director of College Counseling at Mount DeSales Academy in Catonsville, Maryland. He received his Bachelor of Science in Secondary Education from Louisiana State University and a Master's in Religious Studies from Reformed Theological Seminary. Jeremy and his lovely wife, Erin, reside in Annapolis, Maryland, with their 6 children. It's not a competition, by the way. I have to say, one of the best Twitter feeds or X tweets to follow is Jeremy Tate. Without further ado, let's welcome Jeremy Tate.
Morning, it's wonderful to be with you. I was getting a little bit nervous in that Mass. I thought I'm going to forget everything I planned to talk about because all I'm going to want to talk about is that Mass. It was absolutely otherworldly. I'm on the road a lot. I've been to Mass at so many schools across this great country. I've never seen anything like that. I was crying. JP was next to me. He can attest. Beauty that is indescribable. I usually, when I speak, I never write anything down. I started writing my notes down because I'm like, I'm going to have to be so disciplined to not just talk about the Mass the whole time because it was incredible. I also just want to give some high praise to Michael Adkins. Michael's been a friend. He's truly one of my favorite people. My wife doesn't love that I have favorite people, but I'm like, hey, Jesus, like his favorite was John the Baptist. It can't be that bad to have favorites. But really, not just one of my favorites in Catholic education, but just in the world in general, a man who has a huge heart for all the right things. And again, congrats on Kiara, number 9. We're going to add a few more as well to keep up, Michael. It is great to be here. As I was thinking about this conference and this day, and then saw the news a few weeks ago, it was just such a powerful reminder that we live in a world that is really, really broken, in a world that really needs Christ, in a world that really needs Catholic schools like Saint Agnes and so many of the schools that are here. The work that you do could not be more urgent, could not be more important. So thank you for doing here. Thank you for giving your life to this cause. What I want to do this morning is just share with you a little bit about my own story and then why I'm so passionate about Catholic education. The high school I went to, I graduated a long time ago in the year 2000 in Maryland. And the high school I went to had something called senior superlatives. I don't know if you do that here. It's kind of weird. And these are like most likely to succeed, best all around. We had like most attractive, some different things, right? I was, by the way, not bragging, but I was runner-up for class clown. It means I was bad, but not quite bad enough. It was the kid that won, Chris King. This kid had the most innocent face you've ever seen. And then the teacher would turn around and he would just like throw the trash can out into the hallway. So I had a lot of competition in my lane, So I didn't get there. But literally, I graduated high school and that was my resume, like runner-up for class clown, But if we would have had a superlative for most unlikely to speak at a Catholic education conference, that would have been my superlative. I would have had that one in the bag for 2 reasons. One is I didn't like school and I didn't like Catholics. Those were those 2 things, all right? So first, school. I didn't like school the whole time. My first memories of school starting in kindergarten, I always internalized it and processed it as like a form of punishment. I just would look out the window and like, why am I here? What did I do to have to be here? I want to be at the creek catching crawdads and frogs. And so I would suffer through 7 hours and then I would run to the creek. And that's when like the day would finally begin, right? Middle school is the same kind of pain. I was the kid in middle school math. I remember Miss Copeland's class and saying, why do we have to learn this? And she'd say, well, it's on the test. And we'll talk about testing in a bit. So it's on the test. I'd say like, no, like why is it in your class or on the test? Like why do we need to know this? And I remember she would say, you're going to use it one day. You're going to use it one day. I remember thinking, I don't think I am. And truth be told, I run a standardized testing company. I don't really use math. And I think I get by just fine. And that's not to take shots at teaching math. I think teaching math is more important than I've ever understood it before. So when I would ask, they would only give me this utilitarian answer. You're going to use it one day. And I was like, no. They never said math is going to impress on your heart and soul and mind the beauty and order and truth in the universe. Math is going to condition your heart and mind to be a receptor of the truth, a discerner of the truth. Math is going to give you an encounter with God, right? I never heard that. In high school, it was much of the same. My parents had a very arbitrary rule that to just not be grounded, I had to have a 2.75. And if I had below that, I was basically on like house arrest, right? And so that was my only motivation in high school, was to not be grounded. And I graduated high school with a 2.9, right? But then going into my senior year in high school, and my parents kind of gave me free rein. I could do basically whatever I wanted, which my older sister said was not how it was for them. I started going to a ministry called Young Life. I don't know if anybody here has heard of Young Life. I started going to Young Life, and I kind of heard about Jesus for really the first time. And we would go to church sometimes growing up, but it was kind of Methodist, it was kind of be nice was the general message that I got, at least. And went to a Young Life camp going into my senior year in high school, and I heard this really clear message of kind of creation, fall, redemption, that I was made to be in a relationship with God, that this relationship had been ruptured because of sin and rebellion. And the way I was living, I could identify with that, and that there was nothing I could do to fix it, but that God had provided that provision in Christ. And so I gave my life to Christ as a senior in high school, and then I started doing something really weird, and it freaked my parents out. I started reading, like obsessively. My Young Life area director gave me Mere Christianity. I went from there to Screwtape Letters. And by the time I got to LSU, I did my undergrad at Louisiana State University. And the year I went, it was #1 party university in the United States. I was like, and I partied all through high school. I was a hermit in college. I would like hang out with people sometimes, but I would literally stay in my room a ton and read church history, Christian apologetics. It was opening this whole world. And like I was doing way better in school, but it was outside of school. It was through an encounter with Christ that lit the whole intellectual life on fire for me. And I was very curious. When I converted, I said, where should I go to church? And they said, remember they used this analogy. They said churches are kind of like Baskin-Robbins, right? When I was growing up, Baskin-Robbins was still single. Now it's like married to Dunkin' Donuts. It was just an ice cream place back then. And so they'd say 31 flavors, but it's all ice cream. And I remember thinking, that didn't really sound right to me. And so I was on this quest for authentic Christianity. And the only thing I had to start with was that the Catholics were wrong. That was the only thing I already knew, right? Because I grew up Protestant enough to know that Catholics were just weird. And the only Catholic I knew was my aunt, who's pretty weird. And so that all checked out really well. And so I was like, I know that they're wrong. So in college, it began this big journey. I started off getting very into the charismatic movement and, speaking in tongues and baptism with the Holy Spirit. And then I find my way into the Baptist student group. And they say sometimes that if you're an evangelical and you ask too many questions, you're going to end up as a Reformed Calvinist, which is what happened to me. So I became very, very Reformed. Like everybody's totally wrong unless you're a 5-point Calvinist. And I would argue anybody until they would fall asleep over this. And then I went to seminary to become a Reformed pastor in the Reformed tradition. And then things started to crack. And then I had the unthinkable thought of like, what if the Catholics are right? I started seminary and I had never even heard the argument that the Catholic Church claimed to be the authoritative interpreter of Scripture. I'd never heard that. But when I got in seminary and realized that my opinion was as valid as the professors or the seminaries, I started to think that would be very helpful if there was an authoritative voice, right? But there were so many things, and I want to just kind of focus on a few different stories that drew me into Catholicism, and then I'll kind of explain how that leads to the work I do now. But I'll kind of go with the transcendentals, truth, goodness, and beauty. So the truth that brought me in, when I was end of my sophomore year in college, the girl of my dreams dumped me. We're married now and have 6 kids. But I did the logical thing after she dumped me. I drove to Alaska to live in a tent and sulk for the summer. And it's true. on the way there, I was like, what can I do to get the girl back? And she had taken a class at the University of Virginia. She was always the smart one, so it's our joke that I got to start the standardized test. And she's at the University of Virginia, and she took a class on, it was something like redemptive themes in Russian literature. And she would try to tell me about it, and I wouldn't really listen. And I never got why people read fiction. I was like, I love church history. I love Christian apologetics. I love just history. But it was like fiction didn't even happen. Like, why? It's just people making up stories. I didn't get it at all. And this is as a freshman, like a sophomore in college. So anyway, I'm like, I'm going to read Crime and Punishment because that's the book that super impacted her. I'm like, I'm going to read this, and then I'm going to talk to her about it. She's going to be impressed. I'm going to get the girl back. And like, this is going to work out. Because she really messed my plans out. Like, we were supposed to get married. And so I'm living in a gravel parking lot in Soldotna, Alaska. We couldn't even afford a real campsite. And I have Crime and Punishment. And I have no other distractions at all, right? I have like a 2000 cell phone where you could do nothing on it. There's no radio stations. It's like I can twiddle my thumbs or read this book to try to impress girl. So I start reading it, and I become completely gripped, okay? And if you haven't already read Crime and Punishment, spoiler alert, came out 160 years ago. You're probably not going to read it this weekend. It's like the first psychological thriller kind of ever written, and it starts off with this horrific double murder, right? And the main character, Raskolnikov, his mind and his heart and his soul are, you see what sin does to it. It distorts it. It wrecks him internally in all of his relationships, right? And Dostoevsky is engaging with the philosophies of his day, and he's undermining them through the power of fiction. And it completely, the scales fell off. And from there, went to Tolstoy, and I was reading obsessively during this phase of my life, all the way to eventually the greatest of the entire 20th century. We can all say it together, which is The Lord of the Rings. Tolkien, I heard it first from Andrew Seeley, and he's right. Tolkien is our Homer. There's no more powerful story to draw students into the sacramental world, I think, than Tolkien. So I was being drawn by the Catholic literary tradition, truth. Drawn by goodness. When I graduated high school, graduated college and went to teach in inner city New York. My wife did Teach for America. I did an urban teachers program, and we lived with her great aunt. And at the same time that I'm seeing how horribly we are failing the students in inner city New York, I'm living with a woman, and I start to understand their story. In the 1940s, my wife's great-grandmother immigrated here from Puerto Rico. She had a series of epileptic seizures when she got here, and she lost custody of her 3 children. And the 3 children ended up in a Catholic orphanage, Mount Loretto in New York. It's actually on Staten Island. And they were raised in this Catholic orphanage and school. These 3 women, eloquent, well-spoken, good readers, incredibly thoughtful, huge hearts, beautiful penmanship. I started thinking, what were they doing in the 1940s with 3 destitute, poor, immigrant children who couldn't even speak English? And for the rest of their lives, they're these amazing. So I started to think, what were they doing? I saw goodness in them that I knew had been born of their formation, which was entirely in this Catholic school and orphanage. So drawn to the goodness of the church. The last one, drawn to the beauty of the church. When I was in college, at the end of that, my parents moved to Lyon, France. My dad worked for the international police there, and so for summers and Christmas breaks, I'd go out to Lyon, and still kind of pre-iPhone, I would often just wander around the city, and I would often end up in an old cathedral. And in front of my parents' house, they had a place right on the Rhine or the Rhone, I get them mixed up, and you could see from there, there's a 5th-story old apartment. You could see over kind of downtown, like what they call Old Lyon, and then on a hill there is a Basilica Notre Dame de Fervière. And at night, we'd have the lights off in the house, and I would just contemplate it. And I was like, why? What made people build something this beautiful? You couldn't stop looking at it. I mean, I'm obsessed with your cathedral. I think St. Paul's Cathedral is one of the most amazing in the world, and certainly in the United States. This cathedral, this basilica, drew me. The beauty of the church drew me. I would walk up the hill towards it, and I would sit in there, and I didn't realize that something was happening, but it was the gravitational pull of the church, and coming back again and again, and all of this came to a head in 2010 when I entered into full communion with the Catholic Church. And at that point, I wanted to get into a faithfully Catholic school, and this is where this kind of connects to the work that I do now. I went to Mount DeSales Academy in 2014. I looked in my area, not schools really like Saint Agnes where I was at, and the school that I found that was the most passionately Catholic was Mount DeSales Academy, a school run by the Nashville Dominicans. And I got there, and I've sent both my daughters there. I can say a lot of great things about the school. But when I got there, I was really shocked by the power and the influence of the College Board. And I'll tell you what I'm talking about. One of the sisters I really got to know, Sister Mary Bridget, she was the kind of Dominican. The other sister said she would read a book a day, the most well-read person you've ever talked to in your life. And she wanted to introduce 2 new classes at Mount DeSales. One was an intro to Christian apologetics, and one was an intro to philosophy. And I would talk to Sister Mary Bridget about the course sequence and the text, and we were both so excited. And then registration time came, and hardly any students registered, like 2, like none. And I was a college counselor, so I was part of talking to the students, like, why didn't you want to take the philosophy? Like, these are the greatest questions. What is happiness? What is a good life? And the main answer was, Mr. Tate, that there are not any AP points. There are not any AP points. And I was like, what? I was so excited to get into a Catholic environment. And these are great students. These are great families. I thought, this is wild. We can't get our Catholic students at a great Catholic school to take the courses we care about most because of the power and influence of the College Board. At the same time, I was running an SAT, ACT prep company. I was perpetually frustrated with what the College Board was putting on and leaving off the SAT, right? I think one of the few concepts that almost every teacher in the country would agree on is the idea that for better or worse, tests inevitably drive curriculum, right? And when the high-stakes tests, the SAT and the ACT, basically censor the Catholic Christian Western intellectual tradition, it undermines that tradition to students, right? When we bring in an external authority into our schools that is clearly not sharing the same vision or the same content for education, it undermines that. I'd love to share with you even just this hypothetical for a second. I mean, the SAT has been around since 1926, the ACT since 1959. If you imagine for a second if the SAT and ACT had always been tests, where everyone knew, all right, this is where you're going to have to grapple with Aristotle. This is where you're going to maybe see something from Plato's Republic, maybe something from St. Thomas, maybe Flannery O'Connor in the modern world. If that had always been the case, what would American mainstream education be like today? What would American culture be like today, all right? And so in 2015, 2016, it was the beginning of kind of a wild dream of like, what would it look like if there was an alternative to the College Board that instead of censoring the Catholic intellectual tradition was instead drawing heavily from it? Could you have the same kind, because this was the conversation we would have in the school. How do we keep the test from shaping what we do here? Maybe it's just the wrong test, right? Maybe the fact that the test is going to be somewhat influential isn't a bad thing if it's the right test, if it's putting students in front of the canon, the kinds of texts that we care about most. So we started this in 2016. The very first test we offered was to a grand total of 46 students. Didn't seem like it was going to really work out nationwide. This year, we're administering the CLT to over 500,000 students nationwide and worldwide. It's incredible, and some people have kind of described this as some of the kind of the crucial infrastructure that needs to get built for this classical renewal movement to really scale, you know? In a lot of ways, it's like the least sexy thing in education. When I talk about everything I believe in education, they're like, and you do standardized testing? What? Like, that's not attractive at all. But it's precisely because standardized testing can be so dull and boring that it's actually one of the most powerful levers that I think has been used to push kind of a radical secular agenda in mainstream education. A couple of introductions I want to make here. We have a couple members of our team. John Paul Thoreau. John Paul, wave hello if you would. John Paul is a father of 7 himself, a graduate from Thomas Aquinas College. I think one of the reasons we're able to do battle against the College Board and the ACT with 65 employees compared to their thousands is because we hire from places like Thomas Aquinas College, Benedictine College. I know we've got Christian Schmier back here somewhere in the audience. There she is right there. We've got Michael Naughton here as well from the Catholic Studies Center. I think these are turning out some of the most amazing, and there's this paradox, right, of their education wasn't aimed at getting them a good job, right? And paradoxically, ironically, they make the very, very best employees. Probably about 4 or 5 years ago, and I'll wrap up here in just a couple minutes, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, after years of telling schools we were not going to do anything with lower grade testing, we would tell them about the CLT idea, and they'd say, look, I love the idea. It sounds great, but our parents are going to lose their minds if we go away from national merit and the College Board. We can't do it. Can you just focus on lower grade? And we say, no, that's not the lever to change education. We do college admissions testing. That's where we're going to stay focused. And then finally in 2021, after like 6 years of saying we're not going to do this, we get a call from a head of school in Texas, and she's saying, I want you to see this with your own eyes. And so we get into a Zoom, and she does a screen share, and she takes me to the website for NWEA Maps. Now, NWEA Maps is the most influential. It's used by the majority of Catholic schools in the country. It's used by thousands of schools. I mean, this is a massive testing platform. It's all adaptive, and nobody really knows what students are seeing in map testing because every test is different. But we do know that on their website, they were aggressively promoting how to help students as young as kindergartners become allies, right? This was on their website, and this head of a school in Texas, of a Catholic school, she said, Jeremy, I will get fired. I will happily let them fire me before I administer anything from this godless company to my students. I'm not kidding. I mean, JP and I talk about this. They were actually having the students learn a song. What is it, JP? Tell us. It's so bad. Yeah, the hips on the drag queen go swish, swish, swish as a sing-along. This is from the testing company that the majority of Catholic schools in the country use. And she said, she said, will you please create something that's worthy of my students? And after 6 years of saying we're not going to do this, in one call I was just like, yes, you know. And what we did is we brought together folks like Michael Adkins, folks from the top classical charter schools, Catholic schools, Christian schools in the country, is, hey, we want to come up with an alternative to MAPS, an alternative to Iowa and these lower grade tests that censor the beauty and truth of the Catholic intellectual tradition and come up with something that's better. And it's been an incredible journey. And so we have a table here. We also have Tim Weens in the audience. Tim is in the back. Tim, raise your hand. We have a great crew. Thank you all. This is going to be an amazing day. I'm excited to be here with you, and let us know if you have any questions. Thank you.